Hi everyone, welcome back to the Psalm 40 Project. Pastor Mike and I are here together again. We wanted to take a couple minutes just to explain a little bit more about what the Psalm 40 Project is, what the Psalm Project will hopefully become, and just sort of our plans for the future. So Mike, can you tell us a little bit about the Psalm 40 Project?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Psalm 40 Project grew out of both a blessing that's been happening at our church and then a challenge. And that is, as we grow as a congregation, which is a wonderful blessing, we recognize that connection with one another is a challenge.
Yeah,
we don't
really
know
is.
each other, and we pass each other.
There are too many people.
There's too many people.
What a good problem.
So, one way to make those connections is by giving testimony of what God is doing in our lives. And I think that's the important part of Psalm 40 Project. It's not a story about me, it's a story about God in me. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So why Psalm 40? Psalm 40, verse 9 says this: I proclaim your saving acts in the great assembly. I do not seal my lips, Lord, as you know. And so the psalmist is talking about a time in his life when God rescued him earlier out of the pit, and he's telling of God's work in his life in a way that reminds the psalmist of that grace that he received. It is a blessing to the people who are listening to him, and it is a witness to people even beyond the congregation, says the psalmist, about God's work in his own life, which brings glory to God. So Psalm 40 has given some shape to the project as a whole.
Yes, and moving forward, many of you have seen that we did the ministers.
Yeah.
We did myself as a staff person. But the hope is that we're going to get the congregation involved as well. And I've already heard two comments that I want to touch on. One of which is, oh, the bar's been set too high because the ministers were the ones to go first. Just to address that, the ministers have spent a lot of time thinking about that in themselves. It's part of the training. It's part of the hiring process in a lot of cases. They want to know your call story. They want to know how you see yourself in ministry.
Right. Yep.
So yes, they are maybe a little bit more fleshed out. However, Pastor Mike and I are taking the time to meet with those who are going to be interviewed. We are going to help work through some of the dialogue, things like that, have prepared questions, and you're gonna see a couple videos in the next few weeks of individuals that we've already done a recording for, which we've sort of already helped them through the process a little bit.
Yeah.
So I don't want anybody to feel intimidated, because we can help that. We can help flesh out your story if that's what if you're maybe missing the words or something like that.
That's right. And I think as we've talked about this, what we are enthusiastic about is that this is a story about God.
Yep.
So the focus, if we feel self-conscious about it, I get that, but in our questions and in our conversations, our goal is to help you tell the story of how God is at work in your life, and in that way, God gets the glory. And in terms of connections, we foster this connection we have in Jesus Christ, and that's essential for a church to flourish.
Yeah, and many of you've already seen my story, and I know this is the case for many of the ministers. It becomes, parts of those stories become touch points for conversation with people you don't know.
That's right. Yeah.
Or even people that you've met them, you learned their name, you should remember their name,
Yeah.
and you don't quite remember their name. It gives touch points for us to have communication with one another, to try to foster relationships with one another in a way that you wouldn't have any information maybe to talk to somebody in the hallway. I've already had several people come up to me and ask me, oh, what instruments do I play? Or, we didn't know that you didn't go to Calvin. for my
that's
undergrad, things like that. So
It's cool.
I understand that it can seem intimidating, but the thing is that it truly is us telling God's story through your story.
Yep.
And that's the hope. The hope is, and some people are going to say, and I've heard this, all the ministers even said this, oh, nobody wants to hear what I have to say.
We did.
I have video stats to disprove all of that. Hundreds of views, some of them up in the 200 views. Your story is going to affect somebody. It's going to touch somebody. It's going to be God ministering through your story to somebody. And that's the hope. And we know that that's going to be the case regardless of whether you think your story really is that important, which it really is.
So our plan now is to be telling Psalm 40 project stories between now and up to Advent. So how do people contact us? What do people need? How are we going to gather those stories, Jonah? 2 ways.
You can let either one of us know.
Yep.
Just send us an email, catch us in the hallway, but still send us an email because oftentimes we have something else on our brains, especially on Sundays. If you catch us on Sundays, send us an email.
Please.
But also, we are going to be reaching out to people that we think, as we think about people in the congregation, those who have a wide breadth of different stories. So again, the entire staff, minister staff, is thinking about it, and those who we think could help touch a wide variety of topics.
That's right. So if you get an email from us, please give it some prayerful consideration before just saying, no, nobody wants to hear my story, because your story does matter.
So I think that about wraps it up, Mike.
Wraps it up.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Shortest Psalm 40 video we have so far.
I think so.
We'll see you all later.